Little girl wrote to Santa at the corner office. The widowed CEO knocked on their door. From the very first snowfall of December, fate had already begun weaving a story no one in the small town of Pinebrook could have predicted. It began with a lonely, widowed CEO staring at a letter that was never meant for him, a letter addressed not to Santa Claus at the North Pole, but to Santa at the corner office. That tiny mistake, born of a child's confusion and desperate hope, set in motion a chain of events that would tear open old wounds, heal forgotten corners of the heart, and lead a broken man through a snow-covered forest toward a woman who had stopped believing miracles were meant for her. If you believe in kindness, in second chances, and in miracles finding people when they least expect them, then please like, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps these heartwarming stories reach more people. Matthew Hale had once been known as the brilliant mind behind Hale Industries, a technology company that rose from a garage operation to a nationwide success. But behind the glossy magazine covers and the title of The Corner Office King was a man whose life had fractured overnight 2 years earlier when his wife, Emily, passed away during childbirth complications. Their newborn son survived only 3 hours. Matthew, who once built empires with strategy and unshakable confidence, found himself wandering through days as if trapped underwater, barely breathing. He isolated himself in penthouses and conference rooms, going through motions that no longer carried meaning, while avoiding anything resembling a real human connection. In Pinebrook, far from the chaos of corporate skylines, lived Sarah Mitchell, a single mother who worked double shifts at a diner and spent her nights stitching quilts for a little extra money. She lived in a small wooden cabin at the edge of the woods with her 4-year-old daughter, Lily, a curly-haired child with the spirit of sunlight even on the bleakest winter days. Money was tight, heating bills were overdue, and Sarah's winter boots had begun to crack along the seams, but she carried on quietly, determined to give her daughter a life filled with love even if it lacked everything else. This year, Christmas felt like a weight pressing on her ribs. Lily never asked for much, a new doll, warm socks, and, as she'd whispered while coloring one afternoon, a friend for mommy so she isn't lonely. But Sarah knew she couldn't afford even half of what her daughter hoped for. Lily had overheard her mother speaking to their landlord earlier that week, and though she didn't fully understand the words, "final notice," she understood the sadness in her mother's eyes. That night, she took her red crayon, a piece of torn notebook paper, and wrote her letter to Santa. She didn't know how to spell North Pole, so she wrote what she thought she heard her teacher say during a holiday story lesson, Santa at the corner office. She drew a square box around it because corner sounded like corners of paper. Sarah had meant to correct it, but in the rush of their lives, she simply tucked the letter into the town's special Christmas mailbox outside the diner. The mailbox sent all letters to a charity distribution center where volunteers, often busy executives looking for feel-good holiday tasks, would read them. This year, a sorting error sent one letter into a corporate mailbag delivered to Hale Industries. Matthew had opened it by accident. He sat in his office on the top floor of the skyscraper, the city glittering like ice below him, when he saw the childish handwriting. Something compelled him to read it. The words were simple, innocent, yet they struck him straight through the armor he'd spent 2 years building. Lily asked for warm socks for her mom. A doll. And, this is what made Matthew press his palms over his eyes, a friend for her mother, because she is brave but lonely, and I don't want her heart to be cold. The letter trembled in his hands. Memories of Emily's warm laughter, her dreams of a big family, her love for Christmas, all poured through him like an avalanche. He had avoided anything related to the holiday since she passed, but this letter, this tiny cry from a child who had no idea whose hands it would fall into, ignited something dormant inside him. Over the next 2 days, Matthew found himself unable to focus on quarterly forecasts or investor meetings. Instead, he kept rereading the letter, imagining the little girl who wrote it, the mother she loved so fiercely, and the quiet desperation tucked between the lines. He had power, real, tangible power, to change their lives. But was he ready to step into someone else's story when he barely had control over his own? On the third morning, snow began falling in heavy, silent blankets. Something in the peacefulness of the storm nudged Matthew into motion. Without notifying his board or assistant, he left the corporate tower, drove through miles of white-covered highway, and followed the small-town directions he'd pieced together from Lily's doodled house drawing. He wasn't sure what he planned to say when he arrived, but he knew he had to go. Sarah had just returned from a grueling shift, her fingers numb, her heart heavy with the dread of unpaid bills. The fire in the cabin was struggling to stay alive, crackling weakly as she dropped more wood into it. Lily sat by the window, watching the snowfall, humming softly to her stuffed bunny. It was an ordinary winter afternoon, cold, quiet, and stretching endlessly, until Lily's eyes widened, and she pointed outside. Sarah turned toward the doorway at the same moment it swung open, letting a gust of frigid wind rush into the warm cabin. On the snow-covered path stood a man she didn't recognize, wearing a dark coat dusted with white, holding a large red box wrapped in golden ribbon. His expression carried hesitation and something unspoken, like a man who wasn't sure if he was walking into a memory or a new beginning. Sarah's instincts kicked in: protect Lily, be cautious. Strangers didn't find their way into the forest unless they had business. But Lily, with the uncanny intuition only children possess, whispered, "Mommy." Santa came to the corner office. For a moment, everything inside Sarah froze. She didn't understand what Lily meant, but the man looked equally taken aback. Then he gently smiled, the kind of smile that didn't reach the eyes, because the eyes were carrying too much pain. Matthew stepped forward with a slow breath, feeling awkward, out of place, but compelled by something larger than his own grief. He explained everything: the letter, how it ended up in his office, how he felt drawn to come here not out of pity but because something in Lily's words reminded him of who he once was before life shattered him. He didn't tell them the full truth about Emily, but Sarah sensed it, the heaviness, the loneliness, the fracture in his voice when he spoke. The cabin grew warm not just from the fire but from the quiet understanding settling between them. Sarah invited him inside, though she couldn't explain to herself why it felt natural. Matthew placed the gift under their small, crooked Christmas tree and noticed how sparse the room was: worn blankets, a thin coat draped over a chair, an empty spot near the fireplace where heat should have been stronger. Over the next hour, they talked, not like a CEO and a struggling mother, but like two wounded souls who recognized something familiar reflected in one another. Sarah opened up about raising Lily alone, about balancing work and survival, about the fear of failing her child despite giving everything she had. Matthew found himself sharing pieces of his own loss, his guilt, and the emptiness that money and success couldn't mend. Lily eventually fell asleep on Sarah's lap, clutching her bunny. Matthew watched the scene, feeling a pang of emotion so sharp he had to turn away for a moment. This warm little cabin, humble, imperfect, fragile, held more life than his enormous house ever had since Emily passed. When he finally stood to leave, Sarah thanked him with a softness that caught him off guard. She didn't ask for more, didn't act impressed by his wealth, didn't treat him like a man of status. She treated him like a human being, something he hadn't felt in years. Matthew drove home through the snow with the image of that small cabin lingering in his mind. Over the next days, he couldn't shake the connection he felt. He found himself arranging for an anonymous company donation that paid Sarah's heating bills, covered her past due rent, and delivered warm clothes for Lily. But he didn't stop there. He returned a week later, not with gifts this time, but with a carefully built gingerbread house kit he found in a store window. He had never built one before, but somehow it felt like something Emily would have wanted him to try. When Sarah opened the door again, surprise gave way to a smile she couldn't hide. They spent the afternoon decorating the gingerbread house with Lily, who squealed with delight every time a candy piece stuck in place. Matthew laughed, really laughed, for the first time in 2 years. Something inside him loosened, like a knot beginning to unravel. But life is complicated. Whispers started in Pinebrook about the powerful CEO visiting a single mother in the woods. Sarah feared judgment. Matthew feared losing the fragile